I want to believe that what Luke was saying was right. They did say, given that the fire is listed as being due to suspicious activity, the human factors contributing to ignition was recorded as none. If this is truly the situation, and he hasn't said anything for a month and a half, there is a chance that he's not allowed to. This is probably one of those times where I'm glad I've got a drink. Now this is made up of leftover Sprite, club soda, maybe a little bit of an alcoholic beverage, and some ice cubes, because what we're about to talk about is Stancypants and his Mazda RX-8. On November 20th of 2022, Luke, or Stancypants, made a post on Instagram talking about how his car had burned to the ground. But it wasn't just about the fact that his widely crazy static RX-8 with super wide wheels and crazy just modifications was burnt to the ground. It was what he claimed had caused it. It wasn't an electrical fire, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't fuel or anything wrong with the engine. No, he claimed that it was done intentionally. He claimed that people put accelerant into the intake and started his car on fire while it was sitting on the side of the road. It's a pretty serious claim to make. It's a pretty serious accusation to tell to a large group of people who ultimately ended up doubling his followers, going viral on the internet, and pretty much causing the widest spread of quick turning, supportive, GoFundMe action around a car before finally a couple of people started asking just what exactly do they think actually happened. Now I'm AlexMartini with 2 underscores on Instagram, and today we're talking about cars. More specifically, we're talking about Luke and the situation that happened with his wide body RX-8 and really what may have actually caused the fire, and maybe just a little bit diving into this show as to why he hasn't said a single thing since November 20th of 2022. So thank you for watching. Please join the Discord. I'm gonna have my first sip of this before I go into it, and I have my notes here because I'm gonna need them. First off, the reason I'm even talking about this is because it goes past the car, and we're gonna get into that in a little bit. I think that there's a lot of conversation around what the car community means, and when it does choose to support something, what happens when it chooses to support something as divided as this, because there's a lot of people that are pretty upset right now, and rightfully so. So first off, let me get into it. First interaction that I personally had with Luke was at Gatlinburg of 2022. Now, I don't know how else to preface this, but I preface it for myself. He wasn't a bad guy. He was a very nice individual to talk to. He carried himself very well when I spoke to him, when I interviewed him and I asked him the questions. He seemed very genuine in his response. And he told me a little bit about his car, and I didn't really try to focus on the car because it wasn't my cup of tea. What instead I wanted to understand was why somebody like Luke would build a car like that. But here's the important thing. When that post was made back in November, I saw tons of people rallying to this post, saying how terrible it was that somebody would ever do this to a friend and that they need to find out what exactly happened. I saw people like Sun City, Static Club, Gels, and so many others, literally tens of thousands of people supporting this individual, causing his followers and Instagram clout to double, and everyone was cheering this guy on, feeling terrible that this would happen in the car community. They truly felt like the car community had stooped so low that it would intentionally cause a fire of somebody else's car. But it only lasted a couple days, because eventually I have other friends, other people that I know in the community that started to question the validity of this accusation, because it is a huge one. So much so that this story went viral even across motorsport channels that probably would never cover a static wide-bodied RX-8. Companies like Road and Track, which was an excerpt here that says, when explaining the compromises of his automatic to manual swapped RX-8, Luke noted that the car refused to start after he swapped the transmission. Because it could not confirm that the car was in park, after all, it no longer had a park, Luke had to circumvent the factory starting procedure, running a direct switch to the starter motor. Messing with the wiring to the starter, which handles quite a bit of power, could potentially cause an electrical fire. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up, and the reason we're gonna watch the video together, is because a lot of people question the quality of the build. They're saying the quality of the build caused the fire, not anybody that was maliciously looking at it. So before that, I just want to take a look at the video that they're kind of talking about, because I think this is important.
Stuff for that. Once we got this in, it wouldn't start because the automatic spits a code when it's not connected.
Yeah.
So it's telling the ECU that it's not in a gear. So we had to wire direct power to the starter, which is what this big button is. This is how I start my car.
So that's the starter.
That's the starter. So that's direct power to starter. And in order to get it to start, you have to flip that switch, and then the computer.
So this is important because I had something like this in my Datsun as well. When I was going through the wiring, rechange everything over, I had to direct power straight to the starter because I was having issues with my ignition system figuring out how to actually get everything to run. Now, I was an idiot when I was building that car. It was my first car that I ever built. I remember actually leaving it on one time, and I left it on overnight. And I remember the next morning, my starter was completely fried. The wiring was completely just like melted to the ground, and the starter was extremely hot. Now, I can't say that my situation is like his situation, but right out of the gate, if this is something that is a switch that could be left on, and the fact that the starter is located on the driver's side of an RX-8 right next to the transmission, which is where the photo of the RX-8 predominantly has most of the damage, that could have explained why the car started on fire. Just keep that in mind.
It says that it's in neutral all the time. You shift it with the manual. So it'll shift, it works perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But the ECU reads it and thinks that it's in neutral.
Dude, there's not a single inch of this car that you haven't touched, huh?
No, pretty much, yeah.
Every single thing.
All the, you know, fuel lines are tucked, brake lines are tucked, gas tank is relocated, all the wiring is different, the trans is swapped, the motors.
You can see, this is another one of those things. When he made all these posts, there's a lot of people that came back and kind of fought back at what Luke had said about his car. Because when you look at the video underneath the car, you're gonna see some pretty questionable things done to get the car to this side of the build. It's super low. He said he had to lift the engine 6 inches. He had to max it out. He had to put washers, all sorts of crazy stuff to lift the engine up. And while he did that and he slammed everything down, you can see that when he went into the coilover system to figure out how to actually mount it all together to the new, I'm assuming, lower control arms, the welds look really rough. The welds look objectively very, very bad. And this is just one of those things where when you create such a hype, when you create such a buzz around somebody coming through and destroying your car on purpose, you're going to incite people that are going to look for every other reason that it wasn't that. And when you do have videos out there like this, you're kind of opening yourself up for some criticism because the car was controversial by nature. It's got crazy wide camber. It's got insanely interesting camber arms, and it's got some pretty welds. Now, again, I'm not talking about Luke. I'm talking about the car. I want to believe that nobody would ever maliciously tell the internet that what actually happened and what they want the internet to believe happened, that people like that don't exist. Okay, that is the lovely fallacy that I live in here in Wisconsin. But when the report was actually filed, they did say, given that the fire is listed as being due to suspicious activity, the human factors contributing to ignition was recorded as none, okay? So they did say it was intentional. Those different verbiage, we'll put the thing up here, but they did say that there was none. There was no human factors contributing to the ignition, and the case was listed as closed. Even if it was listed as incidental, meaning that it incidentally started on fire. Now, there's a few things that you have to remember with these reports as well. And this is something that I actually asked a couple of my friends and my family that are paramedics and firefighters and things like that, that when you go and file these reports, things labeled as incidental can also mean incidental as in the person that owns the car or has the object did something that caused the damage. That's incidental, right? If you leave a burner on your gas stove on and then your house starts on fire and they source it back to that, it could be labeled as incidental, meaning you did it that caused that. It doesn't inherently mean that somebody else came into your house, turned on the gas burner, started the fire, and it was that person, right? Especially if the case is marked as closed. And I will say having direct power to a starter is dangerous. Do you do it? Can you do it? Do you have it on track cars? Do you have it on certain things? Absolutely. But depending on how you have it wired, you can mount stuff really fast. And that's just something from my own experience. And to know that the starter's on that driver's side near the transmission, and seeing the picture of where the fire started, it's not that hard to believe. Now, there are other reasons RX-8s have started on fire. Someone had 2 coils go bad on the internet. The cat got so hot that the insulation in the engine bay actually started on fire because apparently RX-8s have insulation in the engine bay. I'm not entirely sure how that works. There were also a couple years where there was fuel pump recalls for fires, but that was 09 to 11, and I don't think that this one was that. I think this was the previous generation. So let's break down some options. Number 1, it was arson. Somebody went to this individual's house, side of the road, snuck something into the engine bay, or the car was unlocked, popped the hood, threw some, accelerant of some kind, started on fire, away we went. Most people would bust a window and start a car on fire, but that could be a situation. Number 2, that could have been an option. Maybe that starter was left on. Maybe there was a poor wiring job that caused extremely hot circumstances with the wiring system, and the main fuse box and the relay fuse box are located where the primary location of the fire seemed to be. And also, the fire stopped at the the end of the engine bay. It stopped at the firewall. It wasn't something that exploded the entire car. That's another reason, right? Now, there's one post that's not out there anymore that I wanna show you. And for those that need the story, this is what Luke put. He put it on his story that at 2:30 a.m., he got a call from his grandparents that the fire department was outside the house. Multiple neighbors heard an explosion in the middle of the night, an explosion. Okay? Pieces flew everywhere and into others' yards. It was determined that there was an accelerant added to the intake and ignited after the arson investigator arrived. My grandpa was waiting outside watching the car he helped me build burn to the ground. No, the car doesn't have insurance. There will be no check. All I want is for no one to ever do this to anyone else. That's a sad thing to hear. That's truly a really sad thing to hear. And I do want to take a second and defend Luke, right? If this is truly the situation and he hasn't said anything for a month and a half, there is a chance that he's not allowed to. If he's in a case situation with allegations, or there is somebody that could be a potential witness or a suspect that they need to go through and actually file a full-on criminal report, a full-on situation, a story, whatever it is that you want to use with this, he can't say a thing about the case probably until it's done. Now let's critique Luke. First things first, there's a chance that in all honesty, in probably the most realistic thing, Luke got a call from his grandparents that his car was on fire. And when he got there and there was an explosion and everything was blown to bits, because that's just how this would work, right? Explosion and heat and things like that aren't uncommon. He felt that someone did it to his car. He felt that there's no way that this car would have either started on fire or caused the damage that it created without some sort of malicious intent. Now, there's a chance that as he was going through this probably really emotional situation, that as he was talking to somebody, if an arson investigator stated that there was some sort of accelerant in the intake, that could have meant oil, that could have meant gas, that could have meant any sort of thing that maybe even Luke had done to the car, or that the rotaries are known to have in their intake sometimes. And I'm not claiming to be a rotary expert, I'm just saying that these cars are picky by nature. So he has this happen to him. He hears that there's an explosion. The arson investigator says that there was some sort of accelerant in the fire, not knowing that that could have meant oil or gas or anything in between. And he made a post that made it sound like it was somebody, because he maybe felt at that time that it was someone, because there's no other reason, no other way that he probably looked at this when it was 2:30 in the morning. Now, I'm not going to justify him not having insurance. I'm not going to justify him having the car on the side of the road. I'm not going to talk about the build quality or anything like that. But what I can say is when you're emotional and when you watch your pride and joy burn to the ground or leave you, it is devastating. It is probably the worst feeling in the world. And so I could see why maybe he said that. Now, this is the tough part, because once that was posted, there were a lot of people that came to support him. I think the biggest thing is the fact that people were trying to defend, protect, and kind of just go after and support Luke with what they thought was him getting maliciously attacked. But these people didn't support him before this whole thing happened. They're just doing it because everyone else is doing it. And this entire car community seems to sometimes do this. They do this virtue signaling, where everything is acceptable except when somebody says it's not acceptable. Then all of a sudden everybody says it's no longer acceptable. But people will turn a blind eye if it's convenient. Street takeovers are the worst thing in the world unless there's a blue Porsche doing it, in which case that's super cool because it's a new Porsche, it's not a Ultima. And that's where I think I draw the hard line. That's where I think this is really, really shitty, and why I hope in everything that I've learned about this story that Luke was just emotionally invested into the car. He made a couple statements, made a couple claims while he was emotionally invested, and now he's stuck trying to figure out how does he back out of what he said. Now, if it is true, I humbly apologize, and I certainly hope that I am wrong. But I don't know if I am on this one. And I really hope the people that said that they support him, that are now turning face and saying that they hate him or that he deserves to have his car burned down, you guys and gals are probably the worst person in this entire situation. Because out of everything that I'd like to believe Luke probably just made a mistake that night. And I hope and I pray that he gets a different car and he builds it the way that he wants to. I don't really with it, but that's not my job. It's not my job to like or dislike how other people build cars. My hope is that it just comes clean. My hope is that the story actually closes. Because if it doesn't close, that is the worst thing that you can do to the car community. Because I think that there's only a few times ever in the car community scene where people have this tendency to come together and support something or stand for something or fight for something that's utterly wrong in every single core virtue of what it means to be a car enthusiast. And when somebody purposely damages and destroys another person's car, that's one of those situations. That's not something you can just toss around lightly. So if I could ask for anything out of the audience, it was to hope that we get closure from this. And Luke, if you are watching this, gosh, I hope you're doing all right. But man, tell us what's going on, because we gotta know. We riled up this entire group of people, this huge audience. We got them all captivated in a story that, if it is true, needs to have some closure, or at least an update. Because the one thing that you can't do is you can't shake the cage, walk away, and then pretend nothing happened. That, my friend, is not okay. But let me know your thoughts below, and of course, thank you so much for watching. I'm Alex, Alex.Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram. I truly, truly appreciate it. Let me know what you think. Please join the Discord if you haven't yet, and we will see you on the next one. Adios.